Greetings. God shows that a new, more powerful America will emerge to keep Israel from being destroyed by the Arab nations. History and the news of the day show that Arab nations, especially Iran, want to totally destroy Israel. God is telling those who will listen that the Arab attack will come. Now, we suspect it will come. It has come before. Israel has won before. We don't know when. Right now, we're more concerned with Russia and China and other bigger fish to fry. But God says this attack will come, and a superpower will protect Israel. Now, we see that in Daniel 11:41. He shall enter the glorious land, Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown. Not a lot of information. The he in this verse 41 is the superpower nation from verse 40, the verse just before it, that has many ships at the end time. The next verse shows Egypt gets captured. Daniel 11:42. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So when Egypt gets captured, and you see it on your news broadcasts, you can come back to this verse, Daniel 11:42, and say, aha, there it is in Scripture. Egypt gets captured. Question, why am I saying Egypt gets captured? Answer, because verse 43 shows a total control situation. Daniel 11:43. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver. Now that sounds like total control, doesn't it? And over all the precious things of Egypt. Also Libyans and the Ethiopians. So there's 3 Arab nations named specifically. But Egypt has been the big focus for a long, long time throughout history. History shows that in World War II, Hitler took total control of all things in France after France was captured by Hitler's armies. Logical. Your armies have taken control, defeated all the armies of the French, and now you can do anything you want in France. And he started stealing works of art. He started running rampant all over France. Same kind of thing will happen to Egypt and these other countries. God used Daniel many times to show the world how God directs world events. Daniel was used by God to tell Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon that his empire would be followed by another empire kingdom. In Daniel 2, verse 39, but after you, this is Daniel speaking directly to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. That must have been pleasant to hear by Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, an inferior. Mine is the best. Then another third kingdom of bronze. This was the image that Nebuchadnezzar had seen in his dream, which shall rule over all the earth. And he's referring to the Alexander the Great's kingdom empire that would follow the Medes and the Persians. Verse 40, and the fourth kingdom shall replace the third kingdom, shall be as strong as iron, and that kingdom, the Roman Empire, will break in pieces and crush all the others. And so the Roman Empire eventually became supreme and took all the others out of the way. Long before major events happened, God had Daniel describe those events in his writings, way ahead of time. Question, what can we learn from this? Answer, God has the power to direct the nations and their activities. God created the universe. God created planet Earth. God created humans. He can create and guide and direct which way nations will go. Example, God used his powers in World War II to ensure that Hitler and Japan would fail. Now, several books, some may not know this, several books were written on the miracles of World War II that caused Hitler's defeat. Don't have time to go into it now. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find them if you wanted to know more about those books. The point is, Hitler had unbelievable miracles happen that caused him to go in bad directions or to lose, he would have had the atomic bomb, except for an accident, an accidental bombing by the British Air Force. The point is, God's powers have been directing world events for thousands of years, right? And so we see here, God's power directs nations. That's what God does, right? Most people don't have any trust in God. They don't even know if there's a God. But God is showing people what is going to happen. Now, when Egypt gets captured, along with a whole bunch of other Arab nations, you should know for sure that God wrote that down thousands of years ago in the book of Daniel, and God knew what he was talking about. So God arranged it so that Daniel would be on the scene in the palace at Babylon on the very night that empire fell to the Medes and the Persians. This is classic. Daniel described that night in Daniel chapter 5. Daniel was speaking to the king of Babylon when he said this, chapter 5, verse 28, "Your kingdom has been divided." Now this, before this, God had had a hand appear and write on the wall in the face of, while the king was watching the hand write on the wall. And nobody could interpret what the handwriting on the wall was, so they called Daniel up, and Daniel says, "Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians," and unbeknownst to the king, just outside the walls of Babylon, the soldiers of the Medes and Persians were actively entering the palace grounds. And God told Daniel a few hours before the Babylonian Empire was destroyed, and then we see in verse 30, that very night, the very night that Daniel is telling the king, "You just lost the empire of Babylon to the Medes and the Persians," right? And he's telling him right now, it's happening right now. And the king goes, yeah, that sounds good. Here's a reward for Daniel interpreting it. And then verse 30 says, "That very night, Belteshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain." The soldiers got inside the capital city of the empire and they killed the king. So what Daniel had written came to be true. What Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar was for sure, because God made it happen that way. Once again, God chose Daniel to show Bible readers how the strongest ever United States will save Israel from a massive Arab attack. And we'll look at that more. In Daniel 11:41, he, referring to a super world power, and we'll see why that is, shall enter the glorious land in God's terms, that's Israel, and many Arab nations shall be overthrown. Verse 42, he'll stretch out his hand again against the many countries. The land of Egypt shall not escape. Egypt has attacked Israel many times in the last 70 years. Most people don't know the history. You could Google it. We got ways of looking things up in a high-speed way of doing that, right? But many times Egypt has attacked Israel in the past 70 years, not lately, right? And so because it hasn't happened lately, most people are thinking it won't happen, or they're pretty sure Iran's going to attack Israel, because that's in the news pretty often. Daniel 11:43, he, this end-time superpower using many ships, shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and precious things of Egypt, Libyans and Ethiopians. Okay, so this is a superpower. This is like Hitler on steroids, but it's a power, that military power, that is capable, using many ships, to do all of this. Question: how can a small military nation accomplish the overthrow of many Arab nations? Answer: it can't. Only a great military nation would have the power to do this in the future. Second question: what shocking event caused America to become a giant superpower in 1941? Answer: the attack on Pearl Harbor. The day after that attack, a sleeping giant awoke. If you saw the movie, the Japanese admiral in charge of the attack on Pearl Harbor is reported in the movie as to have saying, "I fear we have awoken a sleeping giant." Right? America was not a superpower, but that very event caused America to be born as a superpower. Suddenly, Americans were furious and fully supportive of attacking Japan and destroying Hitler's armies in one day. It happened on the 7th of December, 1941, and the next day the president got up in front of the Congress in Washington, D.C., and they declared war on Japan, and shortly thereafter Hitler declared war on America, and America declared war on Hitler, and it was on. And old wars, let's say recently, now let's come to the current time. Recently, America's military was built to its most powerful status ever. You can look those facts up. Old wars were ending and new wars were begun. No new wars were begun except the campaign to destroy ISIS, which was very successful. Now, Russia and China and North Korea and Syria and other evil actors, right, were restrained in those, back in those days when America's military was very strong, were restrained from hostile expansion activities. Things are different now. Things have changed. Russia is attacking Ukraine. That's in the news. China is close to attacking Taiwan. Iran is helping Russia, right, using weapons of Iran to help Russia, and a possible nuclear war is mentioned frequently on the news week in, week out. Now, God knew the day would come when Arab nations would band together in a powerful way and attack Israel. It's coming, right? It's sort of under the surface right now. If Iran can get a good head start, they might band the other nations together. It's hard to know exactly how that will work, but everybody knows Iran wants to destroy Israel. God decided back in Daniel's day that he would not allow Israel to be destroyed by the Arabs. He knew it was coming, and he said, no, that's not how history is going to be written. It'll be written differently. Most TV commentators are unaware that Israel will soon face the worst attack ever. It's just, most people can't foretell the future. God can. God can, and if you read what God says, then you can. You can know what God is saying, right? It will happen because God, who directs world affairs, says it will happen. And what God has said will happen in the past has happened, and so what he says is going to happen in the future will happen because God is in control. God also has plans to block the Arab nation attack. Question: what are God's plans? Now we focus on God's plans for Israel. God has plans to save Israel from the Arabs, not permanently, because a little bit later on we find out that Israel does get destroyed for 3.5 years just before the beginning of the tribulation, but that's by the beast power. The beast power is not a bunch of Arab nations. So you can't destroy Israel twice, right? If you drive it into the sea, if you drop a nuclear weapon, if you totally eliminate all the Israeli people, the Israeli nation, and the Israeli military, right, then there's no Israel to destroy a second time. And God has ordained and written in Scripture that he will allow the beast power to destroy Israel, and therefore he can't allow the Arab nations earlier to destroy Israel. He has to save Israel from the Arab nations. Now, many are aware that Arab would like to use a nuclear bomb to wipe Israel off the face of the planet. It's like they're about to have a nuclear weapon. They're about to have a nuclear weapon. And Israel is going, yeah, and they're going to use it on us, and we can't allow that to happen. And so something's going to happen in the near future. God is watching Iran's efforts and has written out his plans in Daniel chapter 11, 41 through 45. It's like 6 verses there. Right? God has blocked Hitler from ultimate success. So too God plans to block Iran from destroying Israel. Question: how can we know that Israel will survive the soon coming massive attack by the Arabs? We see three answers to this question. Answer number one: the great superpower with many ships enters Israel to repel the attacks and saves Israel from annihilation. That's one answer. Daniel 11:45. And he, the many ship superpower, will plant the tents of his palace. That's a little vague. Interpret that as his military headquarters. Between the seas, there's the Mediterranean Sea on one side, there's the Dead Sea on the other side, and the glorious holy mountain, or the Temple Mount. If you see any videos in the news of the Dome of the Rock Mosque sitting up on the top of the Temple of the Mount, if you see any film footage pretty much of Israel, they generally show you the Temple Mount. Answer number two: the attacking Arab nations are all captured and overthrown by a superpower nation. Daniel 11:41, he enters the glorious land and many countries are overthrown. Answer number three: after this war, a second world leader steps up with plans to tax the Israeli people. Now, if they're destroyed by the Arabs, there's no way that a second leader can show up and arrange and start planning on taxing the Israeli people. They're still functioning. Daniel 11:19. Then he shall turn his face, this is the many ships leader, he shall turn his face towards his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found, and there shall arise in his place. So the many ships guy comes to his end. God doesn't tell us how that happens, but he just tells us he comes to his end as a superpower. Verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, on Israel. So Israel is still alive and well. I mean, they suffered war, but they're still going and they can be taxed. Then it says, within a few days, this guy who's planning to tax Israel shall be destroyed, not in anger or in battle. This guy gets one line in the Bible. It's like he arises after the first guy is taken out of the place. His plan is to impose taxes on Israel. Within a few days, he's dead. Right? And then verse 21 shows there's a third world leader who arises, but that's for another time. God mysteriously says the many ship superpower comes to its end, and a second world leader steps up for a short time, and he wants to tax Israel. The point here is that the Israeli nation survives the Arab war and can be taxed. Question: which nation will God use to save Israel from the Arabs? Only a superpower nation would have the military capacity to invade and capture and overthrow many Arab nations. It cannot be a minor nation. It has to be a superpower nation. God shows that only one superpower survives a war between the superpowers. Question: where in the Bible does God show an end-time war between the three superpowers? Answer: Daniel 11:44. First we see that God gives the time setting in verse 40, where he says in verse 40 of Daniel 11, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, the king of the north will come against him like a whirlwind. That's a powerful military, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. This is at the time of the end. All you have to do is ask yourself, how many militaries are there on the face of the planet here at the end time, getting close to the tribulation period, has many ships? And that really cuts it down to a very few nations. And because he has many ships, he enters the countries, overwhelms them, and passes through or withdraws. The time of the end refers to that period just before and during the Great Tribulation, which lasts for 3.5 years. This mighty king makes war like a whirlwind. It's like Hitler made war, and that's old history, but Hitler had blitzkrieg. Well, nowadays with modern missiles and weapons and bombs, from laser-guided bombs, this end-time superpower makes war like a whirlwind, uses many ships, and later withdraws from the Arab nations in verse 40. Then comes verse 41, and that shows him entering the glorious land of Israel and overthrowing many nations. This has not happened yet. And then in verse 44, we see God's microscopic description of the war between three superpowers. Now, you have to turn to this, you have to look at this, you have to read this slowly. God gives enough details to see clearly that this is the three superpowers at war. So we have this here, the three superpowers at war. Okay, I told you it's in verse 44. Let's read it. It's only one verse, and so we have to examine the details word by word. It says, "But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate." Okay, if you read that quickly, you go, okay, news. What kind of news? Doesn't tell us. From the east, okay, you have to figure, you're not told in this verse, east of what, right? And from the north, and we're not told, north of what, right? Trouble him. Okay, so it's troubling news, and this is how this superpower nation responds. He goes out with great fury. He's furious at the news. This has been a military attack against his forces. He goes out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. That's a big deal, right? Okay, question. What does east and north mean? Answer. East means east of Jerusalem. Now, if you can picture a world map, and here's Jerusalem, east of Jerusalem is China, a world superpower, right? Okay, same thing. If you picture Jerusalem and you go north of Jerusalem, Moscow. So you've got Russia and China, the two superpowers. Verse 43 shows this mighty military power having control over Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, while standing in Israel to protect them. Therefore, his troops are in the Jerusalem area, right? And so his troops are in that area. The news from the north, Moscow attacks somehow. We're not told how. And China attacks somehow. We're not told how, right? But the news is so devastating that he goes back and he destroys them and annihilates them. Like I say, a quick look at the map will show Moscow to the north, China is east of Jerusalem. So which of these three superpowers loves Israel and would want to protect them? And the answer is very clear. China and Russia would never fight to save Israel from the Arabs. Next question. In the last 6 years, which of the superpowers has been already best friend to Israel? Answer, America. Can be the only right answer, right? Go back, Google it, you'll see the American president did all kinds of great things for the Israeli people. Now, next question. Is America well positioned to rush to save Israel right now? And most people would answer this with a resounding no. No way on God's green earth would America today or next week or a couple of weeks from now, if a war started between the Arabs and the Israelis, no way would America go full force, land in Jerusalem, land in Israel, and capture many Arab nations. It would not happen. So, back to what God is showing us in Daniel. God plans for a stronger than ever America to be able to capture many Arab nations. We see here a most powerful USA saves Israel. It can only be Israel. It would have been Israel back had all this happened 3 or 4 years ago, but it hasn't happened yet. So God, now a little research will show us that America went from a non-superpower status to a superpower status in a few short years after Pearl Harbor. The day after Pearl Harbor, Americans everywhere were in total agreement that America had to go to war with Japan and Germany. And that happened overnight because America was attacked on its own soil in Pearl Harbor. One solidly united American population immediately began the process of defeating Germany and Japan, where a week before that, most people in America wanted nothing to do with the European war. Question: would America go and capture many Arab nations if the Arabs caused a giant attack on American soil bigger than Pearl Harbor? What do you think? The answer is yes. Why? Because shortly after 9/11, America was bombing terrorist camps in Afghanistan and went to Afghanistan and controlled Afghanistan for 20 years. It's the American way. You attack us on our soil and we're coming to get you, right? So, what gigantic event could awaken a sleeping giant and cause it to capture many Arab nations? God doesn't tell us. God has not described such an attack, but he has described what happens after that attack, the capture of many Arab nations. Most people have grown to ignore God's word, the Bible. Most people doubt seriously if there is a God. Those who trust in God of the Bible can't figure out what God is doing. You know, where is God taking us? What is God doing? But they know the tribulation is coming. Well, before the tribulation comes, many Arab nations are going to be overthrown. Hopefully, when America saves Israel, people will acknowledge God's great power in directing world events. God tells us so we can know the future. If we read Daniel, we can know the future, right? And knowing the future and the way God has written us, we can then learn to trust what God tells us in the Bible.